I remember vividly we had to go have this meeting. It was our second year. So kind of the first year that I had some influence on the products. And our marketing guys wanted to do two names for games that were going to be controversial. And one was Deadly Tide, and one was Hellbender. So the idea of having Microsoft on the box and then like the word dead or deadly and or tide, which I'll explain in a minute. So we're nervous. This is the names we want for the games, and we're going in and we're going to meet. It's going to be three people in the room: Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Bob Herbold. Okay, and at least two of those names, I'm sure people know. Bob Herbold was a then president of the company. Both Ballmer and Herbold came from Procter and Gamble. Okay, and what's the number one product from Procter and Gamble? At least at that time, it was Tide detergent. Okay.
Right.
In fact, Balmer personally worked on Tide detergent. So we're going to propose something called Deadly Tide is the name of our product that says Microsoft on the and then of course the Hellbender. So we walk into this meeting and our marketing guys do their thing and they show their stuff and why what the game looks like. The game looks really cool and here's the name we want to use for him. And before Herbold or Ballmer can say anything, Bill Gates says, "I like it. That's cool." Um, and, we look over to Ballmer and Herbold, and we could just see them biting their tongues. We're like, "Okay, we're done here." We leave the meeting, and we got to use the names.
Hello and welcome back to We Thought It Would Be Easy, the podcast where we dive into, catchphrase, the creative process behind games, movies, comic books, basically any kind of entertainment with an emphasis on interactive, of course. I'm your host, Jonathan Grant, sometime game developer, game designer, and now co-host of this podcast with my other host, the legendary, not, that doesn't mean old. Sometimes he likes to say that it does. It means high impact, not old, but the legendary game designer, Jordan Weisman, creator of Shadowrun, Battletech, MechWarrior, Crimson Skies, and many, many more. And Jordan is here with me to introduce our esteemed guest this week. I'm very excited about talking to our guest because personally, I've lived my entire game development career practically in the long shadow he's cast over the industry. So without further ado,
You're supposed to be
here,
lowering expectations here. Lower that.
here is Jordan to introduce our guest.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, I'm very excited to have Ed Fries join us on the show. Ed and I met actually when he came as part of a due diligence team to investigate Fast Interactive and eventually acquired us and moved us all through Seattle. And then I'm happy to say that over the years we've become very good friends. And while most people will think of you as the father of the Xbox, quote unquote, I've always thought that was a bit of a misnomer, right? Because the hardware side was moving independent, and then they decided we need to put something on the hardware. Who are we going to stick with that job?
Sounds very Microsoft.
Ed stepped into the void and said, me and my little team of game developers will somehow figure out how to put content onto a platform and build a giant ecosystem to support all sorts of incredible content. But I personally, as I've gotten to know you, really see you very much as like the teenager cramming Frogger onto an Atari cartridge, right?
Thank you.
Or
Thank
your
you.
early Microsoft career.
That's how I see myself too.
Yeah,
Teenager.
I do. And if we look at your background, I mean, right, your passion continues to be about, how you can do so much with so little, right? And a deep appreciation for the early days of video games when they had so little to work with and made so much out of it. And I kind of view you at this point, you're a archivist of recreating all these ancient games, which is incredibly cool. And then as you got into, an actual career at Microsoft with Excel, and becoming one of the leads of Excel and trying to figure out how to put that incredible processing into very, very small memory limits that would make today's devs just, break down and weep. Because they would have no idea, like, what's a bit? We don't know. We don't
The space they
deal with anything.
allocated for an icon.
Yeah, exactly.
It's so bad these days. I don't know. Sorry to interrupt, but it was like, we were at the climbing gym the other day, and Jasper was showing off one of my sons, and he was gonna climb a very hard climb, but just wearing Crocs. So, and a friend picked up a camera and set it to video so he could record him. But he was like pointing it kind of at the ground for a while, and in my mind, I'm just thinking about the millions of bits that are being wasted right now. It's just like unique perspective from growing up when bits really mattered.
You kids don't appreciate your bits.
You realize how many bits you're wasting.
It's the modern version of the dad, like, yelling at you for touching the thermostat and telling you to put a sweater on.
Exactly. I'm the bit dad.
Yeah. That's so true. When I think about when we did the early cockpits, right, and we constructed at that time, written up in the IEEE magazines, a 16 megabyte memory card. That was literally 2 foot on a side. 2 foot on a side for a 16 megabyte memory card. And now I think like a Cheetos package has more memory in it now, I think. Yeah.
I do though.
Well, anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, indeed.
So back to, so we were kind of getting there. We were like, we were going to say, let's hit rewind. Let's go back and kind of, I want to start with, you've been a gamer, I mean, pretty much since they invented, like me, right? Those first video games, we were alive when they were first invented. And what did they mean to you as in your childhood? And why did it set the hook so deep in your heart that it became, a lifelong passion?
Yeah. And I think probably for both of us, it goes back to before video games, I think when I think about my childhood, sometimes I talk about this. One of the main things I think about is being bored, which is not something that happens to kids anymore. It's like we've taken away boredom, and it's kind of, well, I think it's good we have, but in a way you lose something, So like I was lucky
you lose that need for self-invention, right? Because you
can go. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, so I was lucky enough to grow up in a pretty rich environment where my parents were both engineers, and so there was lots of stuff to play with and learn from. There was a house with a lot of science fiction to read, and we had a few TV channels so we could watch like Star Trek and that kind of thing. But a lot of time, you're like you're on a 8-hour car ride, and you're just sitting there in the back just staring out the window. That's what my memories are. We're like on long hikes, and I'm just trudging along through the woods, and it's like, I don't know, so to me, I don't know, I guess I needed that stimulation of games and competition and getting friends together, first around board games. And I remember early pinball machines, like, wow, this is like a machine to entertain me. It's like so, in junior high, a friend, their parents ran a comic book store, and we would go over and play, very early Dungeons and Dragons, and that was an incredible experience for. Most of us old people in the game business, have some connection to D&D at some point.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I was also lucky enough to be, I was in high school in the early 80s when the arcades really exploded, and there was a bowling alley not too far from where I live. We could get on our bikes and ride there and see the latest games. So that was all an influence for me as a kid.
Was there a particular arcade game that I mean, you've now rebuilt so many of them, but was there one that's like you remember so clearly from your childhood?
I'm not particularly good at playing games. That's one thing I would say.
That is something else we share. I share that as well.
Yeah. So I never, and when I was a kid, quarters were pretty precious, too. So, at least to me they were. So, but But I was always down there, like trying the different machines and seeing what they could do. By the time, early 80s, by then I was already programming, first on like a little 6800 machine, and then Apple II, and then Atari 800 was the machine I ended up having at home. And that was, so by then, when I was at the arcade, I was just looking for something simple enough that I could make it myself. So it was more like I was scouting for something I could go back and program. Um, yeah.
Yeah. So this is something I thought was really interesting about some of the research I did into your early career, because you did start pre-college with a bunch of this stuff. And I think the insight that, your parents were engineers, and so you had a lot of cool stuff around the house is maybe telling there. But I want to ask you, because it is something, especially in this era we live in, and we're all dads. I have a young son who's 9, and I'm thinking about this. We live in this era where for some kids, it's just really much harder to start actually building anything. Or maybe not harder, but it doesn't seem to occur as much. What inspired you to actually, before you were even thinking about a career, get into, building and creating, if not, and entertainment, but also just visual experiences on the computer?
Yeah. Looking back on it, it took a while. Like, um, I would, my mom went back to college when I was in 6th grade and got a master's in computer science. And so I would tag along with her sometimes and see the, really big machines. And she's
Yeah.
working on punch cards and stuff like that. It was fun to see, but it wasn't like I didn't aspire to do that someday, at that point. Um, I think when I was in junior high, I was actually pretty into like drama. I was in plays, and I worked behind the scenes running like the lights and stuff like that. And so that was fun for me. Uh, but it wasn't really till high school that I just kind of fell in love with programming and realized that that was the thing I really wanted to do. Uh, and in a way, it just kind of wraps up everything else that you're doing. Is like, okay, if you love to like put these pieces of code together, it's like little puzzles, and be able to like bring things to life on the screen, right? But what should I make? It's like the blank page kind of problem, right? Like, what should I make? And so you look around and say, oh, well, maybe I could do something like this board game, or maybe I could do something like this thing I saw in the arcade, or something like that. Or we played a lot of cards, my friends and I, at that time. And so I made like a little gin rummy program called CompuFo, and I would have my friends play CompuFo and see if they could beat it and stuff like that. I made a little robot battle game where you could program these little robots, and then they would run around the screen and shoot each other, and
Oh
played
man,
that
so
with my
there's even
friends.
more than we even knew about. You were just kind of generating a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and part of that comes from like you're looking at the magazines, and they've got like type in games, right? And
Yep.
so you're typing in the type in games, and sort of some of that ends up sticking in your brain about how a game could be structured, how the code could go together, and so that just leads to trying to make your own things and go from there. And yeah, I don't know how much of that. I mean, today for kids, to your question, yeah, it's probably a little overwhelming. There's so much stuff out there. Whereas for us, it was kind of the only thing we had. We had like a machine that could run BASIC and maybe assembly language someday if you really knew what you were doing, and some magazines, maybe a book or
Yeah.
two. I mean, we didn't have the
Yeah.
internet. We didn't have, there's so much stuff we take for granted. We were in such a information bubble back then without even realizing it, right? You just had a few books around, a few magazines, what you knew, that you had a
Yeah.
few
And I think
channels on TV. Yeah, go
I
ahead.
think people underestimate how important magazines were
Yeah,
to the development culture, right? I mean, because it was the most efficient form of deep information distribution. Uh,
absolutely.
maybe you can help me in this, because I remember that there was a period, right? There was the type in period. And then
Mhm.
there was a period where they would start to bind in like an audio tape or some kind of
Yeah.
that you could scan in. And I was trying to remember what tech that was, but it was really weird.
It's simply a cassette tape, and you had a cassette tape player. That's what I had at first for my Atari 800, and it's like a
Well,
modem, where it's just
oh,
turned the bits into audio tones, and then it's
yeah,
reading
absolutely.
in.
And
Yeah.
I had that on my Apple too, but this was, and my Pet 8K
Oh, you're
before
talking
that.
about something better than that,
This was bound into the magazine, but it was like a strip, like
but not like a floppy. No,
it wasn't a floppy. No, it predated
I don't know what he's
floppies.
talking about.
I don't know either. It's a
It's
bit of lost
it's like
tech.
an LLM hallucinating over here.
Find out what that is. I don't know what that is.
Jordan,
I don't
you've
know.
been overtrained. You've been overtrained.
At one point, I wrote a program to help me type in the programs. So it's just to give you a sense. So we're like
early
single
editing
keys.
tools.
Yeah, we're like a single key would type in a whole basic keyword, so I could go, do it faster. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a really, really good practice for us back then, because, like I said, you learned some good practices, but you also you inevitably made mistakes when you typed it in, and then you had to go back and try to debug it, and learn a lot from that.
I think, something I think about a lot when I watch my son is, for us, and, I'm certainly probably 15 years behind you guys, 10 maybe. But I still think we had a similar experience where if you wanted to get these things running, if you wanted to play this stuff, no one was there to help you. Your parents had no idea what you were talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah.
The resources were super limited. And if you really wanted to, whether it was, play a game on the Atari, or for my era, I think the statute of limitations is over, but, pirate something so that you could play a cool game that you couldn't afford. You had to teach yourself. You had to figure out how to, run your PC in different modes to maximize the use of the RAM. You had to, set up your caching. You had to type in the game from the magazine print. There was no one there to help. And so I do think it made a lot of these things easier for people of our generation, it made it easier to give yourself permission to try, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Ed, I want to just completely skip over what is an incredible accomplishment, which is the shipping of Excel.
I have an Excel story for you if you want. But okay.
Oh, okay. All right. We can do an
Yes,
Excel story, and then we'll skip over. All right, dude, let's do that.
Okay. I'll try to do this as quick as I can. We're, I joined Microsoft as an intern in 85, joined full time when I graduated college in 86. They put me on Excel. I was the youngest of 7 programmers making the first version of Excel for Windows. And we worked on it for a year and a half. We got down to the end, and we were just doing the final debugging before it shipped. And when you get down to the last month or so, hopefully you're down to very few bugs, and you're spending a lot of time kind of waiting around. And we were screwing around, like, in theory, we were looking for bugs when we didn't have bugs to fix, but we were like writing games in Excel and stuff like that. I wrote a little, somebody made a darts program. I made a little chess program, stuff like that. But anyway, this bug comes in the bug list, and we all see it because there were very few bugs at that point. We're just a few weeks from launch, and it says, run this long macro, runs for 10 minutes, and then the machine hangs, the whole computer crashes. But first it pops up a message that says Sindogs. Okay. So it pops up and says Sindogs, and it crashes. And, I'm like, oh, that's ridiculous. That can't be right. And I'm like, I'll look, I basically, search through the code for the word Sindogs. There's no word Sindogs. I have no idea what this is. But anyway, it gets assigned to our lead programmer, and our lead programmer, or technical lead, a guy named Mark O'Brien, he's super, super talented. And, normally he can fix anything, in a few minutes. But he can't reproduce it. Then he goes and but the tester can, so he has to go and get the tester's machine and move that back to his office. And every time he changes the macro in any little way, the bug goes away. But the bug is there. And I mean, this is a time when we're going to release this thing. It's going to get stamped on, or actually in this case, duplicated on millions of disks and go out, and we have no way to patch, right? We have no way to
Right.
like make a fix to this once it goes out. It has to be right. Um, anyway, days go by, every time he changes the macro, it goes away. He asks a bunch of us to try to like make it even happen on our machines. None of us can make it happen. Um, and he's normally like a happy guy, but he's been like working like round the clock for a week at this point. We're like tiptoeing past his office, and finally, I walk by. We're like being quiet when we walk by, and I look in his office, and there's just all these wires coming out of the machine, and I lean over to one of the much more experienced programmers than me. I'm like, what is that? What is he doing? And he says, it's an ice machine. And I said, what's an ice machine? He says, in circuit emulator. He can record every machine instruction and then play it back from when the crash happened. So once he got the ice machine set up and running, he was able to find this bug, and pretty quickly found out that it was a bug in Windows itself. And I remember we're there late at night, and he finds what it is, and they're like, get that guy back in here. Like call the guy from he lives in Kirkland. He had to come back into work, fix this bug. But the bug was basically, it was drawing a chart, and it was drawing a line through a box in a chart, and the line was supposed to be clipped by the box. It was supposed to stop drawing the line, but there was a bug, and it kept drawing the line through memory. And so the line drew through memory, out of our memory and into the system memory, and right through the Windows code, and right through the word Windows, and flipped several bits in the word Windows to change it to Sindogs. And then the error message popped up and said Sindogs, and the whole machine crashed. So anyway, we named our server for the next version of Excel Sindogs, because that was,
of course,
that was our favorite bug.
All right, so wait, so you've now gone on record and said that there was a chess game and a couple other games inside Excel. Is there the mythological flight sim in Excel?
That was actually after I moved to Word that they made the flight sim, but I was very proud of them. They made like a Doom clone in a later version too, which was pretty great. The last version that I worked on, where I got to do the Easter egg, was, I had a dream, and in my dream, our main competitor, Lotus 123, there was like the box, and it started to shake, and then it breaks apart, and all these bugs crawl out of the box. And so that's what I implemented for the last Easter egg that I did. So
I wish there was a chart of like revenue generated by different tools, and we could like benchmark to Excel, right? So it's like, here's Excel, then there's like Unreal. You can see like how much actual revenue each tool generated.
yeah. I was talking to somebody the other day. They were talking about poker, doing early like poker player games, and I was like, "Oh yeah, we used to do that in Excel. Um, we made these little poker bots when we were bored, and we would have them play against each other over the network, and so we could watch, who was winning. We created this little library that would just a set of playing cards, and we had an intern named Wes Cherry who was with us that summer, and he asked if he could borrow the library. Sure, go for it. And he made a solitaire game, and that became the Windows solitaire game. So that's where that came. So you're talking about like, revenue. Talk about like eyeballs, time wasted. Wes Cherry wins.
Right.
Yeah,
he's probably
absolutely.
of every game
Absolutely.
ever in history. So
I mean, this is fascinating, because I definitely have, as I said in the intro, a very different perspective of you and your career. And so much of where I've worked has been in the shadow, because in products that only existed because of some of the strategic choices that you made at Microsoft. But here you are, like, really this kind of old school indie hacker almost
I
engineer. It's just
was definitely a
amazing.
hacker.
It's amazing to hear and to get that perspective on, you know, and it's wild to think that, having known many of the people who worked in that kind of way on, if not Excel, but, similar sort of dry, relatively dry business products, it's amazing to hear that that's where you actually started your career.
Yeah, well, I did. I was, you know, first few years of college, I was making games on the side for a game company, and I did three different games for them. And then 1984 happened when I was halfway through college, and the whole game industry melted down, and so that's you know finished that next year. I went to work for Microsoft as a summer intern, and then so when you're a programmer, in some sense, it's fun no matter what you're doing, as long as it's like challenging and interesting,
It's
it's
creative.
like, yeah, you're solving these tricky technical problems, especially back then when you're balancing, you know, speed and memory use and, you know, everything else. So it's, yeah, I always had fun working on Excel. I had fun working on Word, but games just have an extra level of fun because then you know, you can play it when you're done and give it to your friends to play. So
So
yeah, and then
how
you're
did
right. I'm kind of an accidental business person. You're kind of heading in that direction, but um,
I think all the best business people are accidental business people. They're driven by passions rather than by avarice. So talk about the transition into MS Games. How did that come about? And at the time it was, well, I put it frankly, it was not a very well thought of enterprise. Externally at least. So.
yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Um,
There's the spice. That's what we're looking for.
yeah, I mean, so basically I'd been working in Office, for 10 years at that point. I'd done 5 years on Excel, 5 years on Word. And for 5 of those last years, the last 5 years, I'd basically been doing the same thing, been a development manager. And that was fun. But like I'd gotten kind of to the top that I could go and still be a programmer. Like I was still programming, and so the next step up was to run a business. And my managers were saying, hey, now it's probably a time in your career you should look at going and look around the company and, step up to one of the business management roles. Um, and for me, that, what I'm hearing, I was only really liked two things. I liked video games and I liked programming. And so, my job, I knew if I take the next step up, I had to give up the programming. And so why not do it in video games?
yeah.
It's basically the logic. So I looked all over the company. I looked at some other jobs. So one of the jobs that I found out that they were like, they had kicked out the guy who was running the small games group at Microsoft. And I'm like, maybe that would be perfect for me. And so I went over there and I interviewed and I saw a very early version of Age of Empires. And I saw, and it was a very exciting time in games when games were just moving for the first time from 2D to 3D, where you could finally
Yeah.
count on having a 3D accelerator, a sound card, these things we all take for granted now. Um, you know, and so there was just a lot of change happening, and to me, it was a very exciting opportunity. I went back to my bosses and said, I found the job, you wanted me to find a job. I found this job that I think would be perfect for me. And they hated it. They told me I was committing career suicide. They told me, why would you leave office, one of the most important parts of this company, to go work on something no one cares about?
Ah.
Um,
Well, yeah, because the games group really, I mean, to a large extent, was kind of a rest and vest place. I mean, it was like people had really done their service, and they were able to go over there and play games. That's the way way the company looked at it, largely.
I wouldn't describe it that way, but you're right. It was not respected by the company at large. And when you're like, well, why would you? Yeah, why would you leave this? You know, core part of the business to go to something no one cares about. But the flip side is, see, and this is when I was joking earlier at the intro about running away. You know, the thing about running one of those big projects is there was a part of it that was incredibly political and not at all interesting to me. You know, and we we in Excel, and then I brought this philosophy over to Word. We we really prided ourselves in shipping something high quality on time. And that's a really hard thing to do. It's a really impossible thing to do in a corporate environment where you're getting influenced from the outside of your group by people at all levels. Like other groups, similar groups want you to adopt their technology, you know, then you're dependent on this other group who maybe doesn't have the same, you know, goals that you have and same schedule drive that you have. You're getting things from the people you work for who have ideas that aren't necessarily good ideas, and you have to say no to them. So when I was running Word, I used to say my job is to say no to people, you know, and I would just say no to all these things that would like distract my team or disrupt our ability to ship. And after a while, that is not a fun thing to do, you know. And so
Yeah.
so when people said, you know, what you're going to go work on something no one cares about, you know, what I heard is I get to work on something no one cares about. You know, this is a cool opportunity. You know, I can go off and build a new business for Microsoft and without all this political interference, you know, that I'm used to fighting every day.
Well, and this was an incredible time in games, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I was literally working in Egghead Software in Northern Bellevue
Mm.
at this time. Uh,
Oh,
I remember a
I was working in
Microsoft.
Shakey's Pizza, by the way, when I was in high school, not that long earlier.
Everyone pull out their
And
cred.
And I was just like, you know, I'm getting like $2 an hour, and I'm like, yeah, I just have 10 more hours, and I can buy the next game. Go down to Egghead in Bellevue, buy the next game.
I remember the Microsoft rep for the store came in and they gave us a ripped from, you know, CD copy of the first Age of Empires, like a debug version. I don't know. I was like, even back then, I was like, how is this legit that this guy
Leaked out of
just
my
gave?
group, sounds like.
But, you know, it's just so funny that, and it's a pattern that's been repeated over and over in the industry. It's so funny that, you know, there was this perception of like career graveyard, and yet you were entering into it at, you know, there were genre defining games coming out every 3 to 4 months
Absolutely.
in that era. Just an
The
incredible, incredible
early
time in
90s,
games.
so many the genres we take for granted now were all created at that time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Hey, also, I wanted to touch because one of the other persistent kind of rumors in the industry is that, you know, the relationship between games, the games group, and DirectX, right? That the games group was there to kind of validate the DirectX, or there was some kind of relationship. When you joined and took over, what was that really like, and how much was there any real synergistic connection between the two groups?
Not really. The DirectX guys were, I mean, there was a set of DirectX technology guys, programmers who were making part of Windows, the part of Windows that games use to run well on Windows. Then there were a group of evangelists, and the evangelists were very good at what they did, but you know, their job was to
Yeah.
evangelize, you know.
Yes.
So they were very high profile people. They were very out there talking about what they're doing and all that stuff. And sometimes that their role gets a little oversized as far as compared to the work that they did, because they weren't like the programmers writing DirectX. They weren't the people making the games. They were evangelizing that programmers should use DirectX. But I mean, the original concept for Xbox, which now we're skipping from the mid 90s to late 90s, did come from that group. I mean, it was originally the DirectX box. That's where the name comes from. And they came and met with me and proposed that you know, we should make this thing. And I knew, I mean, they needed games for it, obviously, and I was in charge of the group that made games, so they needed my help. And I was interested in what they proposed, and you know, started to work with them, started to support them. So yeah.
But yeah, I always viewed those guys as kind of like they were media influencers before there were media influencers, right?
I mean, some of the stuff was so over the top. The parties that they had at GDC. I mean,
Oh,
there was a toga
yeah.
party where they had actual like lions in cages, and I mean, they were, the I think the year or two after the party that they were throwing this party at a Air Force base in California, and they were going to bus people out to this Air Force base. And anyway, the 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 DirectX guy who was in charge of it, his boss found out that this was costing X million dollars and stopped it. And then uh, there were he and his team were like in the facility, and the Air Force guys wouldn't let him out before they paid. It's like they were like held prisoner until Microsoft paid to release them. I mean, it was this whole like it's really a cool story that I'm butchering right now because it's not really my story, but yeah. Yeah, that stuff got bigger and more out of control.
Well, and I
But
I
it
was
just
there. Oh, good. I
no,
was
go
going to
ahead,
say it
Jordan.
was when we went from, because when you sucked me up into the world of Microsoft, which was my first. I mean, you were my first boss. I'd never had a boss before,
I'm sorry.
so that that was a whole new experience, and a very positive one, I should say.
Okay.
But it was all new experience. But yeah, we were PC focused, right?
Yeah, for
And the
sure.
Xbox, came in a couple years later, and it was a huge transition in our group. I mean, it was
Yeah.
no small thing, because we were about 300-ish,
Yeah.
right, before Xbox, and then 1,500, you know, a year, something silly
Yeah.
like a year
Yeah,
or
like 2
18 months
years
later.
later. Yeah, yeah.
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 Did you anticipate that it was going to be that level of change by when this project first surfaced?
Well, definitely not. I mean, the first version of the Xbox that was proposed was a PC. It was a PC just pretending to be a game console. Um, and that's the original thing I signed up for because I was like, there's this big console business and we're not getting any revenue from it. And we have all these PC games, and these guys come in and say, "Hey, we want to make a machine that can sell in the console world but run PC games." It's like, wow, that sounds pretty good to me. um you know and over the first year of that project, it slowly morphed into, as they went out and talked to a bunch of game developers, console game developers, it slowly morphed to look more and more like a PlayStation than like a PC. But really it was always a hybrid of both. I mean,
Yeah.
it was built on PC hardware for the most part. And it included a hard disk, for example, which
I was going to
no game
say, yeah, which was
consoles had.
a financial, just endless black hole, was that hard drive.
It was,
As-
but it was also, the only thing kind of unique in our hardware that we had too. So,
yes, I
um,
remember us trying to figure out quickly how we could take advantage of it to do something unique, because
exactly, exactly. We leave
um,
that up to the creative people like you.
well,
Well,
but also I think it was interesting because, the I don't think that the evangelists understood that even though video games, that console games and PC games are built in a similar fashion, they're built very differently, right? And that the whole kind of experience design is so different, which I think caused us some issues, because a lot of our developers were not, so a lot of our initial development group was not really the ones who knew how to design great console games, right? They designed great PC games,
Right. So those were
and
the
there was a
connections
learning
we
curve
had.
we all had to go through on that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I think it even, like, if you look back at the group before, just as I joined the group, the previous head of the group, a guy named Tony Garcia, he had acquired BAO, the company that made Flight Simulator, and Flight Simulator
Yeah.
was the cash cow. So
Yeah,
when I
absolutely.
showed up, we had this one product that was making a bunch of money, and that was what we were using to fund everything else. So it was kind of in a nice financial shape when I walked in the door. Um, but for the first, but really, you could think of the team at that point as a bunch of people who were there to manage and support external developers. So it was working with groups like Terminal Reality, Ensemble Studios, like we mentioned before, the Axis Software guys who were making Microsoft Golf and also making its biggest competitor, Lynx Golf. Um, you know, uh, and so it was, so we had like test teams and producers and stuff like that. But actual DNA in the group of being game makers was actually something we really didn't have enough of. And so
Yes.
through BAO, we got at least that group in, but it's kind of its own. We don't really think of it as a game that much, you know? So when we acquired you guys, I think that was really one of the first times we had in-house game development, and people could learn from that. And then and then we needed in-house console game development, which
Right.
really was quite a. I mean, I acquired Rare in 2003, but that was like, um, much after the original Xbox launched. So
I mean, I
Yeah.
think I want to kind of just like zoom out just a little bit on specifically you, Ed, in that time, because, you've got this early career as this like indie hacker, like we said, right? Then you went and worked for probably one of the most dry and demanding software development processes of the era.
I
Running.
don't see it that way at all, by the way.
But no,
But
but that's great
but
because that's what I want to hear. It's like, you're supporting like critical business processes as an engineer. And then, you made this jump into running the games group, and these are all quite distinct, and yet you stitched it together, and it sounds like it was felt very natural to you. So like, can you explain that? You know what I mean? Like, what
yeah, I
was
was
your
just faking it the whole time. So.
A long running theme in our podcast because every single person we've had on it, including ourselves, just fakes it.
um, just to talk about the part that I objected to in your fine comment there. Um, when I joined Microsoft, it was, first of all, it was a very sort of hippie place. So you got to imagine, like, I mean, there was the really kind of main creator of Excel is a guy named Doug Clunder, and he literally looked like Jesus. I mean, he has this long beard. He liked playing that up. He had like a big picture of Jesus, and he's not a religious guy at all, by the way. He would walk around barefoot, in the hallways wearing, I mean, most people, it was very common to see people without shoes in the programming hallway, and whatever. And we were the little guys. I mean, so IBM was like the big, big brother, bad corporate dry guys. Then there was Lotus was larger than all of Microsoft, you know, and they had a big team doing Lotus 1, 2, 3, and then you know, we were like Star Wars, we were like the rebels, like trying to attack, the empire that was IBM and Lotus. That's how it felt to me, as a young person coming in. And so it was very exciting, and that our underdog team, which was much smaller, was trying to outsmart these guys and basically take their business away. So that was very fun to be part of,
And that
and
must have
so.
translated right into the console wars, right? Did you feel that exact
Yeah,
same way?
exactly. Thank you. So for saying that. So actually, I went to have that fight on Word between Word and WordPerfect, and we fought that battle. Then I went over to games to try to have the fight with, you know, PC games. And you guys made a comment earlier that Microsoft wasn't respected in games. I remember the first E3 that or yeah, first E3 that I went to, which was I think the second E3 ever. And I was new to the group, and they had all the plans already. And one of the things about the plans is it involved wearing a shirt that said Microsoft knows games, and when you have to put it on your shirt, it shows you don't know. It's very self-conscious, sort of thing. But anyway, that was, so we were trying to prove ourselves in PC games, and then trying to prove ourselves in console games. Everything that I did while I was there, I always felt like we were the underdog. and we were battling somebody much bigger than us, whether it was fighting people like Electronic Arts when we're doing PC games, fighting people like, Sony and Nintendo when we're doing Xbox. So to me, I think that's part of what made the game exciting for me. The game of the business part,
Right.
Yeah.
we're the underdogs and we're trying to win. I know from the outside you think, well, Microsoft, huge company and blah blah blah, but again, we were the rebels inside Microsoft, when
But
we're the
this is
games group,
that that's the through line that I was looking for, because it's like,
Yeah,
there you are trying to figure out how arcade games work and trying to, program for this weird console with not a lot of help or documentation. And then you're trying to, you know, basically do the same thing in business, right? Where it's like you're trying to figure out how this market works and you're trying to kind of figure out where the levers are. That's really interesting. And I do want to just quickly mention,
yeah.
because I,
And,
I think it's,
oh,
go ahead.
I just want to say one thing. Like every time, like I say I or you say me, it's like 100 people or
Yeah.
a thousand
Right.
people,
Yeah.
that are doing it, and there's no way I could have done any of that stuff without the other people on the team, the teams that I had around me, and the great people who, together. So anyway, I just sometimes it's you're the most visible top of this pyramid, but it's like yeah,
Even when
it
you were
took
making Froggy.
yeah. Well, maybe not
No.
then. Maybe then it was
Yeah.
just
I
me.
was gonna say there are many
Maybe that.
single person accomplishments Ed has, but I agree with you. Yeah, it's a unfortunate nature of our media that we tend to only feature the couple people at the top of what are huge dedicated teams that make things happen.
Yeah. And if for example, we hadn't brought, you know, Bungie in and they hadn't made Halo, I don't think there would be an Xbox today. Um, you know, so
Yeah, no, I mean
in that sense, they're more important than me for sure. You know.
that's the moment
Eh,
that I kind of wanted to follow up on, because you went, you mentioned Flight Simulator when you first came into the group, and I actually remember working retail at that time. Flight Simulator was branded really clearly with the Microsoft logo on it. And in fact, it was kind of branded in a similar way to like Office. Like it almost looked like it was in the same family. And then there was this pivot, right? Over 10 years. You went from that to ultimately like Halo first, but many other incredible games on the Xbox. What was that like? Like when we talk about creativity, there has to be, obviously there were huge teams all contributing in a massive way, like you just said, but you know I think they were pretty clear. It must have taken a certain level of vision to make that pivot over that time. Talk about that a little bit.
it was it was less vision and more a battle. It was like, I mean, when you're starting, I mean, the Microsoft brand maybe helps, right? Because it kind of reassures people. But it goes both ways, like, which maybe isn't obvious. The rest of Microsoft, the ones who didn't care what I was doing, uh, did care that if I broke the Microsoft brand. Like if I released something that made Office sell less because people were boycotting Microsoft or something, that was bad. That was they let me know that would not be okay. And so we actually had, like, in the early days, we had to go and get approval for things. Like our marketing guys, especially, they were trying to be more like gamey and trying to be, and like there were some things that we just couldn't do. Like we 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 had to put the Microsoft logo on the screen at the start of our game. And we proposed all sorts of cool Microsoft logo treatments to the corporate, overlords of the Microsoft brand, and they would just say no to everything. And they were like, "Well, what can we do?" And they're like, "It has to be these letters in this font on a white background." And so, if you go back and you look at those early Microsoft games, kind of say 1997 or so, there's this there's this long camera shot that flies through across a landscape and then up through the clouds, and it comes right up through this white cloud, and then the word Microsoft comes through the cloud. So it's the Microsoft against a white background, and that we got away with, so but we so I remember vividly we had to go have this meeting. It was our second year. So kind of the first year that I had some influence on the products, and our marketing guys wanted to do two games that were going to be controversial, two names for games that were going to be controversial. And one was Deadly Tide, and one was Hellbender. So the idea of having Microsoft on the box and then like the word dead or deadly or Tide, which I'll explain in a minute, and then Microsoft Hellbender, So we're nervous. This is the names we want for the games, and we're going in and we're going to meet. It's going to be three people in the room: Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, and Bob Herbold. Okay. And at least two of those names, I'm sure people know. Bob Herbold was a then president of the company. And both Ballmer and Herbold came from Procter and Gamble. Okay. And what's the number one product from Procter and Gamble? At least at that time, it was Tide detergent. Okay.
Right.
In fact, Ballmer personally worked on Tide detergent. So we're going to propose something called Deadly Tide is the name of our product that says Microsoft on the, and then of course the Hellbender. So we walk into this meeting, and our marketing guys do their thing, and they show their stuff and why, what the game looks like. And the game looks really cool, and here's the name we want to use for him. And before Herbold or Ballmer can say anything, Bill Gates says, "I like it. That's cool." Um, and, we look over to Ballmer and Herbold, and we could just see them biting their tongues. We're like, "Okay, we're done here." We leave the meeting, and we got to use the names. So it was because and Bill was over the years very supportive of what we did in the group, and he was always a person who I think if he had more time, who would have loved to be more of a gamer. Of course, he's famously a Minesweeper player, and he's just a competitive guy, and so he was always an advocate for us.
I remember, I don't know if you'll remember this meeting, but it was only a couple months after the acquisition, or maybe, yeah, this was within the first handful of months. And we were doing a review for Bill of the group. And so we had a layout of all the games we were working on at the time. And then it was yourself, Robbie Bach, Bill, and myself sat down to get his thoughts and have a discussion. And he, at one point, Bill says, "Well, that all looked good, but why don't we have our Mario?" And yeah, he looked to Robbie, Robbie looked to you, and you looked to me, and I had to explain to Bill Gates why we didn't have a Mario character, and which actually led into a whole discussion, the difference between a console and PC games, and the difference between character and world, and all this. And it was a, I don't know, couple minute long little thing. And as I found often with Bill, he sat there quietly and then said, okay. Actually made sense to him, and he was like, "Okay, onward, next question."
Good job, Jordan.
But it was a fun trial by fire on an entrance to Microsoft.
I've seen you pitch to Steven Spielberg. You're an awesome pitch man. So
well, I appreciate it.
You can handle him. You can pitch to Bill Gates.
I wanted to touch on the branding for a second, because, and this is often sometimes, from my perspective, right? Not a long-term Microsoft person, but my perspective is that Microsoft often had a very different view of the world than the rest of the world had. And so they were viewing Microsoft as this, incredibly valuable, dynamic brand. Whereas by this point in history, the rest of the world was not viewing Microsoft that way, right? Microsoft had replaced IBM as the big
Right.
evil overlord,
Right.
and also a very stodgy company. And so, where they were afraid that this effort in Xbox was going to wound the Microsoft brand. What it actually ended up doing was completely the opposite, right? It rejuvenated the Xbox brand. I mean,
Yeah.
the
Or
Microsoft brand, and
Yeah.
Microsoft stock, even though the thing was, at the beginning several years of Xbox were financially not good,
Yeah. We
mainly
lost
because
a
of that damn hard drive.
$1.5 billion or something. Yeah.
Yeah, for those damn hard drives. But overall, stock rose because it changed the perception of the company.
Yeah. Yeah. So when we got the final permission to do Xbox, and I've just told the story a million times and I don't want to tell it again about um
Don't tell.
the yeah uh the Valentine's Day massacre, which I'm not going to tell. Um but whole part of that, what we were asking for in that meeting was to be independent from the rest of the company. It was like, hey, this is something we're trying to do something really hard in a really short amount of time, and we do not have the time to fight with the rest of the company and get this done too. So, we want to move off to our own place, separate, and we want to be left alone, and we want to be able to create this thing the way it needs to be created. And that translated into a lot of freedom for us as far as also marketing goes. So
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
we didn't have to go back to the brand overlords and all that stuff.
Yeah, because as you
Uh,
said, it was a huge thing to do in a very short period of time, and that additional pressure would have made it impossible. I wanted to touch on a little bit of for why did Microsoft go into doing this for a second, and because my perception at the time, it was not because
Going into Xbox, you mean?
why did we make Xbox in the beginning, right? And my perception at the time is, it certainly wasn't viewed as like a core thing for Microsoft. Like, oh, games are a big business. We want to be in that business. My perception was because Sony had been so successful in its previous generation of consoles that it started to talk about itself as the operating system of the living room, and that had been something that Bill was very focused on. Right, had spent a lot of money on TV top devices to try to get Windows into the
Set-top
living room.
boxes, yeah.
Yeah, thank you, set top boxes. So he had spent billions in other places trying to get Windows from the den into the living room. And now we saw Sony doing it through game consoles. It was my impression that that's why this was of interest to Bill.
Yeah, and so it's hard to answer the question without getting political a little about Microsoft, but you can imagine Microsoft as like a whole series of like city states that each have their own leaders and their own goals, and then some, and then above them is some leader trying to sort of wrangle them to get them to go in a certain direction. And so uh, things happen when sort of there's an alignment of goals between like the lower level people and the higher level people, even if the goals are like completely different, right? So like you could say in this case that I wanted my group to make games, and I wanted, to build a profitable game business for Microsoft. That's my motivation for my team, right? Um, the Windows group wants to see Windows everywhere. Um, that's their goal. And they had done, a thing with a deal with Dreamcast for Windows CE. And originally we had promised that Xbox would run Windows. And the DirectX guys who helped, come up with the original idea and promoted it was really, they were trying to get, really their goal was to get Windows everywhere, including into the set-top world. But when you get up to the level of Bill and Steve, it's more strategic. And definitely, Sony was one of the, kind of scariest consumer brands out there in the, 80s and 90s. And they were doing some things that were making Microsoft uncomfortable. They were installing lots of hardware into people's homes. And the original goal of all of Microsoft was a computer on every desk and in every home running Microsoft software. In every, so desk meaning work and home, and we had done the work part pretty well, but we hadn't done the home part very well. And that was something I would remind Bill of sometimes when we were talking about why what we were doing was important. So So yes, definitely there was at the Bill and Steve level a goal of sort of countering Sony as much as it was about building a really profitable business for the company. But but that wasn't my goal or my group's goal, you know. So
Yeah. So I want to kind of move past Microsoft, even though I think we could probably talk for another 3 hours about it. Um, because there's some, and maybe you don't view it this way, so I'm going to kind of just take my interpretation and then feel obviously critique. You know, you left Microsoft 2004, um, and then you did, I feel like something kind of unexpected, which is to say, you know, you weren't like, okay, I left Microsoft. Now I'm doing my own, you know, startup big company, or, you know, I'm building a, you know, empire, necessarily a new empire somewhere else, even though many people who had your track record and tenure did take that kind of approach. Instead, it reads to me more like, you know, you were more interested in smaller scale, sort of like honestly more richly creative little enterprises. And, you know, that arc has kind of continued to where you are today. Do you think that's fair or accurate, or how would you summarize it?
yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think um I guess I've always I don't know. Maybe I'm just sort of fundamentally lazy at the core, you know. So I so in that sense, I like have to be really excited to do anything, you know. I have to be like I have to be you know, I have to really feel like it's, you know, worth my time. I don't know. And
So what
so
felt
the
like
thing
was worth your time?
so, you know, like, so first of all, the part you leave out there is that that was when I was starting my family. So,
Yeah,
you
I was
know,
gonna say.
you know, I had my first son was named after the Xbox. His named Xander, Xander. He was born, you know, March just after that, you know, Xbox launched US November, Japan February, and then Xander March. So very busy time in my life. And then my son Jasper just a couple of years later. So, you know, you know, I'd been at the company almost 20 years. I'd made enough money to kind of do what I wanted to do. And I had, you know, two great young boys at home, and I wanted to be around as they grew up and be a dad to them. But I also, you know, can't help but get excited about things and want to work on projects and fall in love with stuff. So that's why, you know, and one of the other things that I felt like I did during that time was try to help people, you know, and that was something I found very rewarding was to be an advisor to some companies, to be a board member to some companies. It was something I could do part time and be there for the kids. You know, and it led in, you know, totally unexpected directions. I ended up starting a little company called Fingerprints, the 3D printing World of Warcraft characters, which was super fun. You know, team of, you know, me and three other friends, and we just built this little business doing that. And you know, it was great. For me, it was great to like leave kind of the stress of running a big game business and just play a game again for a while, you know, and you know, you know, I was a big EverQuest player, and then, you know, I got to play in the beta for World of Warcraft, and then just I played a bunch of World of Warcraft for a few years, um, and uh, and then it ended up leading to starting that business. So that was just you know, a fun. You mentioned kind of the word hacker, you know, to me that was a hacker job. I did a bunch of the programming on it. I did all the stuff to extract the characters from the game and pose them, and you know, so I got to become a programmer again and do that stuff, and it was just I don't know, it's sort of like if you could do whatever you want, what would you do? How would you spend your time? You know, I try to spend it on things that I'm excited about.
And I'm
And
really glad
I don't
that
not
you.
I never was really excited about like being in front of a, you know, leading a huge team or being a, I don't know, being a CEO or anything like that. I just want to make cool stuff, you know.
No,
And I'm
I
Sorry,
mean,
glad
I
you
Jordan.
think
raised. Hold on, John. I'm glad you raised the family aspect, because I think it's something I've always really deeply respected about you, is that you a lot of people have the not a lot of people, some few number of people have the capability to take that time, but so many don't, even when they have that capability, right? And because we're driven by ego, we're driven by whatever, to stay out there, stay in the limelight, try to keep making bigger and better things. And I think you had the priority of, like, there's nothing more important to me now than raising my boys. And
exactly.
it's a something I've always really looked to with a great deal of respect, that you took that time and then found ways to continue to help others and entertain yourself with little projects. But that was clearly the priority order, was the kids first and these other things secondary.
Well, and you a parent of 3 boys yourself, so
Yes, mostly raised while I was off building things. So, but yes, no,
and
it's something I really
to have the luxury
it's a,
is like, yeah.
yeah, but and take advantage of it. Yeah. So
And I think that it's so I love hearing these stories and getting a richer understanding of this era and what was happening for you mentally and how your early creative efforts contributed to actually building this classic era in gaming. Because it is a little bit of a chip I carry on my shoulder when I think about where I think gaming has made missteps. And it's been when it wasn't passion driven, I think. And, you see this, I often see online or on Twitter or wherever, I see a younger generation of gamers asking questions about, like, why isn't X better, or why aren't we doing more in this? A classic example would be RTS. What happened to RTS? Why aren't we making great RTS games anymore? And what I can see in my career as a game developer is that, you know, for some people, the motivation has always been to get into gaming because it was hot and interesting and people were making money and you could go create a territory and conquer it. Um, and whenever those, people who are motivated in that way sort of ran out of gas or got a little older or whatever, they just became disinterested in the field and it started to be, low risk copy kind of efforts. And I think, now we're still struggling with that a little bit in the era of PMs in gaming. And I don't mean project managers, I mean product managers who are often, more focused on the business, right? They're building the spreadsheet. They're not building a game in the spreadsheet. They're literally building a spreadsheet from the game. And so, you know, it's just so refreshing to me to hear, kind of your delight driven approach to building this stuff. And then, post Microsoft, a delight driven approach to building things as well.
Well, I think I'm a gamer at heart. I still play lots of games. I loved Expedition 33 this year, and I encourage everyone to play that game to the end. It's I really think a masterpiece. I mean, and um, it's beautiful. It's creative game mechanic.
yeah.
It has an incredible story. It just does so many things well, and rethinks a bunch of things that have been around a long time, and presents them in fresh new ways. It's not perfect. No game is perfect, but this game is really, really good. And I don't think you really appreciate how good it is until you get to the finish, and you
Interesting.
really find out what the game is all about. So, yeah, that's a game that but I think if you look at what's successful, it's always what's successful. Sure, yeah, people want I like this game. I want more of this game. People always feel like they want more of this thing they liked. I liked Halo. I want more Halo. But then if you look at what's actually selling, yeah, okay, those are selling, but what is succeeding that isn't a sequel it's always something new and really creative and
Exactly.
interesting.
Yeah.
And, and so you have Expedition 33, you have, I don't know, just weird little stuff like is it Schedule 1 or Schedule A? I can't, yeah, or, grow a garden on Roblox now. Wow, why is that so big?
Yeah.
It's, and then this Bonanza game on the Switch 2,
Right.
it's like, so it's like, it's not enough anymore. I mean, the game is super hard. It's not enough to just even have a great IP, and slap that on your game. And
Yeah.
you have to do creative things because gamers are bored. And they quickly get bored again. They're like me as a kid, It's like we need new stimulation.
I,
So
I, I think one thing that like all the games you just mentioned, I think one thing that they all had in common is that there was no one doing market forecasting in the design of the game, right? No one was sitting there because market forecasting is a really great way of predicting what sold last year. And all these, innovation doesn't come from that. Innovation comes from passion, and deep knowledge and caring about the experience and the players, uh, uh, and then forms new markets, right? So when in any creative field, what you can be sure of is there's gonna be a lot of games that look like the ones you just mentioned next year, right?
right.
Uh, and
Exactly. Exactly.
uh,
It's the safe choice. It's the least safe choice.
exactly, yeah, and
Because
we've
it's
talked
almost guaranteed to
about.
fail. Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. I mean, you invest billions chasing after a really well defined, extremely competitive marketplace, or do you invest, a fraction of that into an uncharted land, right? And you cannot predict the value of either of those accurately, right? But my experience has always been that your odds are better charting off new territory than trying to fight to the death in an environment that's already super populated. And what was interesting in Xbox when we were turning that for a second, we had to do both, right? We know there were categories that we know we needed to be in, and those were really well established. And we had to go into those battles in a very tough environment. And then we took flyers that were like, we're going to go off and try things totally new. So I appreciated the portfolio balance that we were trying to achieve there. And it was a difficult balance to have. And we had hits in different categories. Some we actually did win in really highly contested areas, and a bunch of the successes came from new territories altogether.
Yeah, and that's how you're saying, what I was going to say. I mean, I think you have to do both in the sense that, I mean, you're saying both in a little different way than I'm going to say it, but the game businesses are built around the having some recurring revenue on some successful franchise. Microsoft first it was Flight Simulator, then it was Flight Simulator and Age of Empires, then it was Flight Simulator Age of Empires and Halo, then it was Flight Simulator Halo, Gears of War, you know, maybe
Yeah,
Forza, and so those you need to manage those well too,
absolutely.
and there's plenty of ways to screw those up. That's a hard job too, just to make Halo 2,
Yeah,
whatever. Um, but then you also need to be doing the little games, and you need to be doing the experimental things that could become your next big game, right? Because otherwise you're not going to
exactly.
have any more next big game. And so, yeah, I mean, and that was kind of the tension when I left, is there was a lot of, I started to get a lot of pressure from above, to be more profitable, um, and that was translating into, oh well, we should kill everything that's experimental and just do the big games. And I'm like, that's the path to certain failure, is like,
Exactly.
so, yeah, but but you see that unfortunately in the industry again right now. You see a lot of layoffs in the industry. A lot of people, you kind of let the, you were ragging on the marketing people. I tend to like the marketing people because I like that they get ragged on too much in this business. But
Well,
maybe I'm gonna rag on the accountants. It's like if you put the accountants in charge of the game business, they're
well,
like,
exactly. Oh,
Yeah.
they're
I
like,
agree.
and we're not, I know we're not disagreeing, we're just using different
Yeah.
words, but,
No, there
but
are
it's
some
like,
marketing people I rag on a lot, but that's not. But I agree with you.
how good
It's
this
the
business could we be if we only made the hits, think
yeah,
of
exactly,
it, right?
exactly.
It's like, let's just make the hits. And this applies to, movies and TV and all that other stuff too. And you get too safe, you get too, sequely, and you lose your audience, because that's not why the audience is
Yeah.
there. They're,
Well, yeah, you can you
we,
can
we,
milk each
we can
franchise
only
can only
watch
milk
so
for
many
so
Marvel
long.
movies.
Exactly, exactly. Then you need to the caretaking of those, as you said, is a challenging job all by itself.
Yeah.
Um, but it also has a finite life, right? There's only so long and so many iterations of something that people will enjoy, and you have to figure out how to take creative risks within a franchise as well as take brand new blue sky risks. No question about it. Well, and which is not a bad segue to your latest ventures with One Up, right?
Yeah,
Where you're trying to take a bunch of blue sky risks, right?
absolutely. Yeah, no, y- y- you were talking about a kind of pitch that my partner Kelly Wallach and I, we don't like to get. We get these pitches, we'll get a pitch from a creative team that have a new idea we've never heard of, and we're all super excited about that. And then we'll go to the next pitch, and the pitch will be, I've analyzed the market to the nth degree, and I found this little corner of blue ocean, and we're gonna make that game for that little blue ocean corner, and it's like, well, have you ever made a game in that genre before? And have you ever, like, are you excited about doing that game? Or are
Right.
you like, well, do you have new ideas there? I don't know. It's just like, and so, yeah, but yeah, we invest very early. We invest at seed stage, which is the first priced round of these companies. We've done about 80 of these deals in the last 6 years through One Up Ventures. So, and we really are is we're a community of founders disguised as a venture fund. So we take the majority of the management fees that the fund generates and we put those back into supporting our community of founders. So we connect the heads of all these little companies together and make sure that they spend time with each other and encourage them to exchange information and help each other to be successful. And that's really where the name One Up comes from. Is like we try to be an extra life in the game business for these guys, um, yeah, it's a lot of fun to be part of. It's been a lot of fun to build. Um, you know, just a, a way for me to continue to have an impact on the game business and work with the kinds of people I love to spend time with. I mean, this business is so hard, but it attracts some of the best creative and technical minds that there are. I mean, look at Demis Hassabis now. I mean, he just won the Nobel Prize for his work in AI. He comes from the game business. Uh,
Well, not to mention the entire hardware power that underpins AI comes from the game business.
we'll take credit for everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
why not? Why not? Hey,
Plus
listen.
the world we live in is a simulation. So clearly there was a game business in the meta
Look,
world.
we
Yeah.
don't always get the dollars from some of these things, so we might as well take the credit. Um,
Absolutely.
so I think One Up's pretty interesting, right? When you look at um the companies that you were able to assemble in this killer portfolio around the Xbox era. And then, you talk about some of the inspiration for One Up. What's different between your time at Microsoft versus One Up, and what's the same? What's like, inspired and a continuation of?
Yeah, I'd say what's the same is wanting to have a broad portfolio of really diverse bets in the game business. We have each fund we invest in about 50 game companies, and we're trying to have a little bit of everything in there. We're trying to have some very seasoned veterans, we're trying to have some really promising new up and coming people, trying to have, lots of different genres, trying to have different platforms. We do some experimental stuff even in, Roblox or UEFN, trying to be global in the sense that, invest in companies around the world for different emerging markets. when we were launching the original Xbox, nobody thought China would be a game business at any time. Now, it's one of the biggest game businesses in the world. You know, India, for example, is an emerging
Yeah.
market where we have a great investment there. South America, there's a lot of fantastic game development starting to happen in South America, Eastern Europe, of course, MENA region, Middle East, and ultimately Africa. And we're even starting to see some interesting game development happening in Africa. So, from my point of view, of there's a lot of world for games left to conquer, you know. I think there's enough work left for the amount of life I have left, you know, to for this game business to continue to grow and take over the world and become, the 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 most important uh entertainment medium in the world. Some could say we're already there, but I think we have
Yeah,
we have
I
more
know.
work to do. Um, and so yeah, that's you know, it's not that different. When you asked for what's different, it's not that different. It's still finding people I believe in, more than ideas, people, and trying to give them the resources to pursue their creative dreams. Whether it was giving Microsoft's money to them or giving our investors in our funds money to them. It's really very similar.
So when I know the investing community hates to use the word bets, but I'm going to just use the word bets because it's simpler. When,
I don't have a problem with that word.
when you look at your time at Xbox and Microsoft as a whole, frankly, um, to one up, you've been continuously making bets. Um, and I want to take it in a little bit of a different direction, and talk about the future for young people a little bit. Um, and I know you have a couple of boys, and so you're, I'm sure, thinking about the future through their eyes too, or at least through a dad's eyes. But when young people make bets on themselves and what they do in the future when they're looking at games, what, I don't want to exactly say what would you do, but what would you suggest or advise when, on how to make good bets about your future in games or interactive entertainment in general?
Yeah. Um, first of all, when I want to know what's going on in games, I talk to my kids because they're as much as I'd like to feel like I'm on the front lines, I'm really not. Like I hear from them. They're especially Jasper, who's halfway through a career at getting his degree at Digipen. But he's always been online with his group of friends trying to find something fun to play, and so great to see the business through his eyes. I think he's going to end up working in the business, which to me is exciting. Um, there's a guy, and I think I'm going to get his name wrong. K Satvat runs this website for helping people get Satvat's definitely his last name,
Yeah.
get their first job in the game business. And I just talked to him this week for the first time. We ended up being judges for a game contest and connected after that. And anyway, he has some really good advice to people about like what are the chances that if you want to get a job like in this part of the game business or that part of the game business, for me, and this is something I was talking about with him. Um, there's some fantastic game schools. Digipen would be one, USC Games would be another, um, where I think you can go and really get a head start in the game business. But for everyone, getting their first job in the game business is hard. Um, I think it's particularly hard to get a job as a designer. There's less design jobs, and yet it seems to be the thing that like lots of general colleges want to offer a degree in, you know. And that was a thing that we were talking about is like, yeah, that's if I was giving advice to a kid. In fact, I mentioned this, and Satvat sent me a letter that he uses, like, because I'll get this request from parents, hey, my kid wants to go to this. He's like, oh, I have a letter for that, and he sent it to me, and it was a really great letter because it's like you should always encourage your kids to pursue their passion no matter what, because that's part of being a parent is making sure your kids are, you know, excited about what they're doing, which I 100% agree with, but then he goes on and he starts to quote statistics about the chance of, you know, if you have a game design degree from just a general university, getting a job in the
Right.
industry, and he starts to compare it to being a professional football player, some things that a general parent could understand. And if the kid wants to be an esports athlete, then it's like it's 9 times harder. What I learned from this letter, it's 9 times harder to get a job as an esports athlete than it is to get in the NFL. And the average career length is 4 years. So, so anyway, so it's like the letter's really great because it doesn't discourage them, but it like make sure they're going in with their eyes open. So I thought that was really interesting as far as advice to kids.
What would a young Ed do today?
I mean, I think a young Ed would make their own games and do it for fun, and hopefully someone would notice at some point
Yeah,
if they were worthwhile. And that's something so that's what I kind of encourage people to do. And I know when we interview people in the game business looking for people, it's like, well, what did you
exactly.
do? What did you do on your own? What did you do outside of school? It's like, oh, for this assignment I did this. Okay, okay, that's not the same as being really passionate. And I just think, whether we're like listening to a team for a pitch meeting or whether you're interviewing somebody, I just think this industry is too hard to succeed if you don't have that core passion for it. You know, it's definitely not a place to go to make money. It's like, so
No,
I mean,
no,
so why are
it's
you here? Like, why are you here?
Well, I'm here to lose money, Ed.
No, I mean, it's like, no, it's like you better love what you're doing. You better love the moment to moment gameplay of making a game. I fell in love with the moment to moment, plugging code together and making it do cool things and seeing it come alive on the screen. That's what I loved about programming. um Jordan's nodding
so.
his head, so I think I'm saying the right thing, or he's just trying to
Yeah, no,
stop me.
and I completely agree. I mean, one of the things we always advise is that the downside of having such incredible tools available to you is that you're expected to use them to express your passion, and if you haven't done so, then you're demonstrating you don't really have that passion. And so, yeah, take advantage of those incredible tools that are out there, and make things that make you happy, and that's the way you'll demonstrate your passion and create those opportunities for yourself. Well,
There
one,
you go.
we've taken up a huge amount of your time, which I deeply appreciate. One question: is there a game or a game concept or an IP, the one that got away, the thing you always wished you could have made over your career?
There's a bunch, but the recent one, my recent regrets, because we'll looked at more than 1,000 pitches, um, and I mean we review probably 10,000 pitches, but we actually had meetings with 1,000, and that turned into like 80 investments. But one that got away is actually Expedition 33. Um, and I didn't even know it because it had a different name at the time. But afterwards, after I fell in love with their work, I went back and I looked, and sure enough, I talked to those guys, 5 years ago, and I even had the old pitch video, which was pretty bad, But it was like they were like year one of their 6-year journey to make that game, and And, I didn't say no to them at the time because they weren't raising enough money for us to participate at that time. I asked them to get back to me when they were raising a bigger round so that we could we could consider joining, but they never got back to me, later. So, but it's fun to see, especially if we're looking at games early, to look at that game early. And, it had the demo, and you can find this online. The demo is very very basic, like if you were going to make a JRPG turn-based combat. But then cut between that are these kind of weird cut scenes that I don't really understand. They didn't make any sense to me. But in retrospect, you look back at it and go, okay, maybe I can see what that might have been, where they might have been
But
headed.
it's a great
So
example that, things are, any creation is a journey, and it takes real vision and persistence, right? To go, one, to be able, when you're investing in something so early, it's sometimes hard, like you said.
to
So
see
that's why
it, yeah,
you bet more on the people, because often the vision isn't realized enough yet at that early stage, right? So you're
yeah,
betting that they'll find that vision, they'll find that
exactly.
fun as they go forward.
Well, and I have this thing. I don't really believe that great games are particularly pitchable. And the example I often use is sometimes when I interview designers, I'll say, okay, imagine it's, 1999 or whatever, before Bejeweled came out. So no one's ever seen a match three. And then I'll say, now pitch me match three. And it's a horrible pitch, right? It's like, oh, well, you got a screen full of scattered gems, and then you match some of the gems together and they explode, and there's a little bit of order, and then disorder comes back in, and it's just like, it shows the one, you get to see the designer, it's like how they think about that kind of stuff and how they pitch, but then also it shows like great ideas aren't great ideas in games at least aren't necessarily comprehensible in that kind of format. It's just not the medium. And I think that it exposes, how hard how hard it really is to do what you're talking about, Ed, which is, go from those 10,000 early conversations to actual investments, aka bets.
I'm going to agree and disagree. Which one do you want first?
Them all. Start with the disagree is so much more interesting.
Okay, let me get the agree out of the way real quickly, and then I'll do the disagree. So, yeah. So to your point, like, by the way, Bejeweled was actually named by our marketing team, and we worked with those guys, and I tried to acquire them before they got big. But anyway, um, but yeah. Imagine the pitch for Terraria. Okay, we're gonna do Minecraft, but in 2D.
Right.
You're like,
Exactly.
what? Like, how is that going to be fun? Like, how is that even going to work? Like, so that's my I agree with you. Uh, Disagree. I would just say that two things. One, if you look back at like who are like the famous game designers that really had a big impact, people like Sid Meier, Jordan, um, you know Peter Molyneux, that kind of thing. They were all really good sales people. I mean, like I'm just, as somebody who got to, I was a gamer, my whole, when I was working on Excel and Word, I was a gamer. And so, when I first came into the group, I was like stars in my eyes every time I got to go meet with these guys who made some game that I played. But they were just the reason they survived in what was a very tough environment then was they were really good at selling their ideas, selling their vision. And, having spent multiple days with Peter Molyneux locked in a conference room, listening to him pitch to press after press after press. The guy's a master, It's like he's got the Steve Jobs, reality distortion field. And I could just
Yeah.
see these people come in and he'd just take them in his hand and take them where he wanted to go. So some, at least in the past, some of the names that you really know, one of their talents was they were really good at projecting their vision, at showing their vision. The other thing I would say is it depends on the game. Like we get some pitches that we're excited about and that really are really creative just from the pitch deck. And then like to your point, or my example, Terraria, there's some that it's really until you can put your hands on it, you're really not going to get it. So I think that we get both.
What's the greatest pitch you've ever seen?
Greatest pitch I've ever seen. Ooh, I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an off the cuff answer to that.
We can assume it was a Peter Molyneux game.
I was gonna say, I was gonna say, Jordan, you should have just yanked that one and claimed it.
Chris Roberts was a pretty good salesman. That's another one.
Yeah, Chris can weave a tale, no question about it.
Chris Taylor, gas powered games.
Yep.
Yeah. So there's a lot of good sales guys out there.
Well, thank you, Ed, for taking the time talking to us. Really a joy, and all sorts of wonderful little stories in there and tidbits for people. So thanks again. The one thing we can be sure about is you'll always be getting another pitch from me. So we'll see. I'll see you and Kelly in the future.
Send it my way. I think our wives are conspiring to get us together for dinner soon. So
yes, that is true. Looking forward to it.
I will see you very soon.
Ed,
and Jonathan, really nice to meet you as well.
Oh, so nice to meet you. And one of my great joys on this pod is to just be a fanboy. So I want to say thank you for your time today, but also thank you for everything you've done in the games industry. Definitely a huge impact, second or third or 10th degree on my own life and a lot of the people I know and the industry as a whole. So thank you for that. Anything we should follow or look at or encourage our audience to look at from you, or a cause you're passionate about, or anything else that we should, feature here quickly or link to in the show notes or anything like that?
I mean, I've been on the board for a long time, the IGDA Foundation, and we support diversity in the game business. I think that the teams that make games should look a lot like the audience that consumes games, and our audience has become much more diverse over the years. And so,
yes, absolutely,
it's important that that we build products for everyone. So that's a group that I'm passionate about.
Yeah. How many times do people forget that gardening or growing things is a really great genre? It seems like we rediscover it every generation. And that's partially because I think there's not enough diversity to, to reflect that sometimes in the creation side.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you everyone for listening. Thanks again, Ed. Give us some feedback on our episodes. Was there a question that we should have asked Ed that we didn't? Let us know in the comments. Maybe we'll talk to Ed again someday, although, no promises. No promises from Ed's side. Like I said,
I had fun here today, so
good.
I might come
glad.
back.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we could talk for hours. But let us know your thoughts if you're watching. Thank you for watching. And I will summarize your many comments to Jordan in a Slack message. So don't be afraid that if you comment, it won't get read. So appreciate it. And we'll be back soon with another episode.